People are fearful of tiny homes. They think of them as going to be on trailers. It's going to decrease the value of their own properties.
Are tiny homes the wave of the future in North Carolina? Will they alleviate some of our housing shortages? And if so, will that have an impact on other types of housing in North Carolina? In today's video, we're going to explore the tiny home movement in North Carolina and the impact it could have on the housing market here in our state. And we're going to take a look at some of the different environments tiny homes are being built in, the changes that are taking place to city codes, and I'm going to tell you whether I think these changes are a good thing or a bad thing. North Carolina is in the top 10 states in the country where people live in tiny homes, but even here, things are changing, and the impact of those changes to those of us not in the tiny home movement remains to be seen. When I started the research to make this video, I was totally against the idea of tiny homes. I honestly just thought it was a really bad thing. I thought it was like putting people in boxes because they can't afford to buy a home, which for the record, I'm against. But the more I researched and discovered what the movement is really about, I realized that I didn't really understand what was happening with the tiny home movement. It isn't what I thought. So what is it, and how might it impact those of us in big homes? The idea of living in a tiny home came about for a couple of reasons. First was the minimalist movement. People wanted a tinier footprint on the planet, and they wanted to be able to have a lesser impact on the environment.
I really strive to live simply, and so for me, this tiny house and this homestead that I've created, it allows me to live the simple life that I desire.
But like all movements, not everyone is in it for the same reasons. Some people are attracted to greater affordability.
We're ready to buy a house. Portland's expensive, and it wasn't really feasible for us to make a big down payment on a house. So we're just like, well, maybe a tiny house is something we can do.
As we'll discuss later in the video, the actual costs of a tiny home are often surprising to people looking for affordability. They are cheaper, but for reasons we'll discuss, they cost more to build. I know that sounds confusing, but we'll get there. Some people who are interested in tiny homes want a property that's easier to take off grid in a rural environment.
My house is off-grid, as in the standard dictionary definition of not physically connected to any public utilities. My primary heat is with wood, my backup heat and my cooking and hot water heating is with...
And some are calling the tiny house movement the solution to homelessness.
You are standing today in what soon will be occupied by as many as 200 people who are currently living on the streets.
Everything is right with it. It's gotten people out of camps near our place. It's got people at least in a transition system.
What do you think tiny homes are most useful for? Put it in the comments so we can have a discussion. With the increase in property values all over the United States, tiny homes are being built in places they haven't been built before. In 2020, the city of Raleigh approved the building of accessory dwelling units, which are basically tiny homes that you can build in your backyard. The idea behind this was to provide greater accessibility of rental units, which are also in very short supply and seeing the same kinds of spikes in prices as homes for sale. But now builders in Raleigh are looking for even more ways tiny homes can change the housing landscape in downtown Raleigh. Not surprisingly, the neighbors aren't so sure how they feel about tiny homes, or maybe they are sure, but it remains to be seen if they'll change their minds. In December of 2021, city officials made the necessary zoning changes to allow tiny homes to be built on their own lots rather than just in backyards. Will developers take advantage of this opportunity to build these types of homes? I don't think this is going to be a big movement in housing, and we'll talk about why I think that in a few minutes. But first, let's take a look at the 3 environments where tiny homes are being built. Warrenton, North Carolina is an old town established in 1779 about an hour and a half north of Raleigh. Even though we visited on a cold and rainy day, you can see that the town itself was once prosperous. The old houses are gorgeous. The downtown is quaint. While we were there, we got to tour the beginnings of a small community of tiny homes in this old downtown area and talk with the developer.
We started building 3 years ago, and it's been very, very successful. Well, there's been some questions about if they're mobile homes or what are they exactly. Right. And so I've been saying before is that what I've been building is a little bit unique because a lot of people are building on trailers, and when you build on trailers, the DMV considers that to be an RV, and no town will allow you to hook your RV up to city water utilities. Mine are actually built on foundation, either concrete piers or slab. And that's how we do it differently. So these are actually real homes We follow all international standards, but they're on a small scale.
Okay, so the shipping container as well is considered a home, and it's on
It is,
permanent
but
foundation.
that was a very hard to convince people, even after we had all the codes and all the regulations, to say this is not a manufactured home, this is a true home. And it took a while, but we
Okay.
finally got it done. I'm very grateful to the town and what they did, but it took a while.
Have you gotten any pushback from the neighbors? Kind of like, wait a minute, I don't want a shipping container as a neighbor.
It's an excellent question. And people are fearful of tiny homes. They think of them as going to be on trailers. And they think it's basically going to decrease the value of their own properties. So it took a number of years. This is my third year working on these projects. And I kept on saying, you have a great town. We're here to complement your town. This is what we're going to do for you, right? And so now that they saw what we built and everything up to code, now people are opening up and they're accepting it. But it was definitely difficult from the initial start.
Tiny homes and tiny home communities built in small towns can initiate revitalization in otherwise far removed towns. These towns have a lot of character and charm. The people are just lovely and welcoming, but they could use the extra traffic that a tiny home vacation community can bring.
We really want to support small towns. You know, small towns are the backbone of America's success, but sometimes they don't have modern tourist accommodations. And so we build 3 to 5, and we drive traffic to these small towns. They're utterly charming. So the local tattoo artist is making a couple $100 off of us every month. The restaurants are making a couple $1,000 off of it. And it's been very, very successful. And now towns across America are starting to contact me about what we're doing because we're really showcasing these towns and what they have to offer. So it's been very successful.
This model creates small town tourism. You know, people right now love the idea of small towns, but it's a pretty big hurdle to actually pick up and move to one. But going for a visit and playing small town for a few days, that's a great experience for people, and it brings dollars into the economy of these rural towns that could really use them. As people visit and spend, more demand grows until the towns really do begin to flourish.
You know, now that we can work remotely, at least a couple times a week, towns like this make sense to live in because you have a lot to, you get along with your neighbors, and there's a lot of opportunity and a lot of value.
And they're affordable.
They're affordable.
I mean, you can get a house for under $200,000 here in Warrenton.
Absolutely.
You can't find that anywhere.
Exactly.
The offshoot is that once that revitalization starts, people really do want to move there and probably move into big houses, further spurring the economy. I can really see how tiny homes in this situation can be a really good thing for everyone involved. The other place we're seeing tiny homes is in a rural environment. Oconee Bell is a development in western North Carolina where people can bring their own home to the community. There's an HOA, river access, community amenities like a central fire pit and community center where residents have potluck dinners and game nights. Remember, one of the downsides to living in a tiny home is that there really isn't a lot of space to host company, and this type of community with its social connections built in lives very differently than what we're talking about next, which is tiny homes in downtown Raleigh. So what are tiny homes like in larger cities like Raleigh? What's happening inside the Beltline in Raleigh is that because there's very little land to build on, builders are buying individual lots and tearing down the 1960s homes that existed there. And because the land value is so high, they can only afford to build luxury homes. If a builder pays $500,000 for a lot, they can't build an affordable home there because they would actually lose money by doing that. Builders know there's a demand for more affordable options in Raleigh, especially in downtown, so there's been pressure on the planning and zoning departments to allow tiny homes not just as accessory dwelling units, but also as standalone homes on individual lots themselves. That was just approved a couple of months ago, and it's going to go into effect later this year. The way I see this potentially playing out is that those $500,000 lots builders are building on, well, they need the lot value to be somewhere between 20 to 30% of the final sales price of whatever is built on the property. So, for example, this home, 1818 Wilshire Avenue, the builder paid $535,000 for the lot. It's 0.22 acres, which means lots in this area are going for about $2 million an acre. That's just the land without the house. This property is going to have a home priced around $1.9 million in order for the builder to make their margins. That $1.9 million has to include the lot price, the building materials, the labor, and a profit so the builder can fund the next project. So follow the numbers here. Tiny home developer Michael Bernstein says these downtown Raleigh tiny homes would be 800 square feet and around $500,000.
I mean, they're going to be quite expensive. They're going to be $500,000 units, I believe.
$500,000.
I think that's what's going to be. They're going to be 800 square feet probably. They're going to be something like that. So that's what I think. They're not going to be as small as people initially thought.
That means on a 0.22 acre lot, if a builder wanted to build tiny homes, he would have to put 4 homes on this one lot in order to make his margins and be able to pay his bills. Can you imagine 4 to 10 tiny homes going into a lot like this one? It's not going to happen. And if you're thinking that $500,000 isn't very affordable, I would agree with you. The median household income in Raleigh is only $67,000, so these tiny homes won't provide housing for those people. But $500,000 is less than the $800,000 median price point for what is currently on the market in downtown Raleigh. According to Dexter Tillett, owner of Tiny Homes Raleigh, it is possible to meet the needs of the median income family in Raleigh with tiny homes. He says that tiny homes could cost under $200,000 to build in Raleigh.
Buy a normal house in this area would be like $450,000, $500,000. A tiny home, I mean, it depends on the site and like how much you have to get back behind your house and all that kind of stuff, but around $120,000, $130,000, that's much better than another, the alternative.
That would mean that he would need to build about 8 homes on that same 0.22 acre lot in order to make the numbers work. Now, is this reasonable or even possible? Just a tiny bit of math can help us visualize what that might look like. A 500 square foot home might have dimensions of 25 by 20 feet. A 0.22 acre lot is 9,583 square feet, so let's imagine the dimensions of that lot might be 100 by 95. I don't know if your brain thinks the way mine does, but the minute I hear those numbers, I start playing Tetris in my mind as I imagine where those numbers might fit on the lot. Once you figure in a 15-foot setback, so you're not encroaching on the neighboring property, you're not fitting more than 4 tiny homes on a 0.22 acre lot. It's just not happening. It seems like, at least for downtown Raleigh, Michael Bernstein's numbers are much more accurate unless you find cheaper land or build much smaller tiny homes. I found a recently purchased lot that's 0.32 acres. You know what they're building on it? They're building condos, which in my opinion makes way more sense if you truly want to respond to the affordable housing crisis. In that 0.32 acres, they're going to be able to fit 24 condo units. This 2-bedroom, 2-bath unit is much bigger than the tiny homes, and the price is actually lower than the tiny homes Michael Bernstein spoke about. This unit is going for $459,000. There are also condos in other parts of Raleigh in the $300,000s. I'm pretty suspicious that anyone could build a tiny home inside the Beltline or anywhere in Raleigh for under $200,000, but even if we could do it, there's a very good argument to be made that we shouldn't. If we take a lot that could house 24 units and build 4 or even 8 or 10 units on it in the form of tiny homes, ultimately, that would create an overall higher cost of housing in Raleigh than if you built more densely and provided a greater number of units. My opinion about tiny homes in the city is that the only reasonable use for tiny homes in the city is in places where more dense construction isn't possible, like a backyard accessory dwelling unit. I'm very curious to see what builders, if any, will be able to build an entire tiny home village like the one in Warrenton here in downtown Raleigh. Would you buy a tiny home if you had the opportunity to buy one? And if you would, tell me why in the comments. What problem would it solve for you? The biggest obstacle I see to the market for tiny homes in the city is that tiny homes cost much more per square foot to build than a condo. What are some things that people don't think about when building a tiny home that they should?
Cost. Absolutely. It's a lot more expensive than people thought. So I bought 1.8 acres of land, but this is it's zoned residential. And so I couldn't put multiple units on it. So the way around that is we subdivided it. It's now 7 units plus 2 common areas. That means that every single parcel has its own water tap, sewer, electrical, and all that. It can be quite pricey.
Condos share floors, ceilings, walls, plumbing, and electrical. All of this infrastructure would need to be provided for each individual tiny home, making the size of the home that you could get for the price much smaller than a condo. Additionally, condos can use ground floors and roofs to provide much needed recreation and parking space that would still be a problem in a tiny home village. I have to wonder if this push for tiny homes is based on a more emotional drive that ultimately will not pan out in actual demand for tiny home developments inside the city. The real issue that causes unaffordable housing in the city is the lack of land. end. Using land that is otherwise unusable for anything other than a tiny home is a good situation. Using land that could support more dense housing is a bad situation. Having said all that, I do believe that tiny homes have a place in the housing landscape. In addition to urban infill and backyards, I really like tiny home rural neighborhoods like Oconee Bell. I think what Oconee Bell is doing is really cool because it isn't just about the housing, it's about the community. The neighborhood was designed to encourage connection between residents in the neighborhood. I would love to see more developments like that one in areas outside of the cities throughout North Carolina. If you like this video, you'll want to follow Christina Smallhorn. She does lots of videos about tiny homes as well as other alternative housing options.